did you all see the movie, the 1981 movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark? On the cover, you see our little makeover, her Raiders of the Lost Ark. Harrison Ford plays an archaeologist adventurer, Indiana Jones. Jones is on a quest to find the Ark of the Covenant before a band of Nazis find it. It seems the Ark is central to the Nazis' plan for world domination. Now, spoiler alert, there is a scene where the Nazis find the Ark and open it. Now, Jones warns his girlfriend, Marion, close your eyes, Marion, don't look, no matter what happens, because he has the sense to know there's something big going on here. Meanwhile, the Nazis walk right up and look in the Ark. They reach in and pick up sand and are disappointed for a moment till they step back for a second and light show begins. A spirit starts flying around. There's fire and tense music and melting Nazis. Our hero and heroine, of course, do not open their eyes until the lid is safely back on the Ark. Even if you have a great deal of power, it's good to be reminded of your limits so your pride doesn't destroy you. Please pray with me. May the words of our mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So this Ark of the Covenant, this wooden box covered in gold, would really be a find today. In fact, its whereabouts are unknown. Some say it's under the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, which of course is inaccessible to us. Some say it's in Ethiopia somewhere. Some say the bottom of Lake Tiberias. Indiana Jones found it in a government warehouse, as I recall. Who knows where it is? The Ark would be a find not just because it's mysterious, but because it's said to hold the stone tablets on which God inscribed the Ten Commandments. The staff of Aaron that turned into a snake at one point is in that Ark, according to the Bible. A portion of the Torah is in there, and there are other religious artifacts. Quite a find, in fact. Whether it would melt anyone who opened it would remain to be seen, but this little gold box was a powerful symbol in its own time. A couple of weeks ago, we read the Ark was lost to the Philistines. You remember the prophet Eli collapsed dead when he learned that news. A few months later, the Philistines gave it back. It had brought them nothing but heartache. This little box seemed to have a power of its own. The Ark of the Covenant was a big deal because it symbolized God's presence, God's power. Now, David knew this. He planned to use the Ark to win over the people of Israel, to prove he was a worthy king. If he could bring it home, they'd be saying, oh, yeah, nicely done. Good, yeah, we want our Ark back. Well, David is one of those characters that you may have already discovered in your own Bible study who defies easy definition. He's an accomplished musician, and yet he slays giants with a slingshot. He serves Saul and loves Saul's son Jonathan, and yet he becomes a fugitive when Saul turns on him in a rage. He's good looking, but he's a little bit of a playboy. Increasingly, a complex character emerges as scholars dive deep into David's story. For example, in today's text, there's a little bit of debate. Is David childlike, dancing with joyful abandon because of his humility? Or is David self-indulgent, even indecent, operating out of his own hubris? Which is it? Fact is, which are we? In the last week's lesson, the Israelites anointed David their king. But having a title is not the same as being perceived as the leader. David recognizes the Ark of the Covenant as a great symbol of power to the Israelites and decides to bring it to the city of David. It's certainly, at its very least, a political move. But as David dances with joyful abandon, it's hard to say if what he's doing is to honor God or if it's just a display, a show. When Uzzah dies, David seems to recognize he may be playing with fire. He suspends the dance and parks the ark. I'm reminded of a passage by Annie Dillard in her book Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. She's a poet. She's written this beautiful book of prose. There's this one section that stands out to me, among others. On the whole, I do not find Christians outside of the catacombs sufficiently sensible of conditions. Does anyone have the foggiest idea what sort of power we so blithely invoke? Or, as I suspect, does no one believe a word of it? The churches are children playing on the floor with their chemistry sets, mixing up a batch of TNT to kill a Sunday morning. It is madness to wear ladies' straw hats and velvet hats to church. We should all be wearing crash helmets. Ushers should issue life preservers and signal flares. They should lash us to our pews. When Obed-Edom the Gittite survives hosting the ark, after David has said, I'm not taking it home with me, David realizes maybe there's something to this, and he renews his parade to bring the lost ark to the city of David. But this time, he does so with a little more measured approach. He starts with 6 paces. Not dead yet. And then he sacrifices an ox and a fatling before he continues the dance into the city. Could it be that this weird story is actually a cautionary tale for the would-be new king of Israel, when this sometimes willful and ambitious David? There's another cautionary tale in the New Testament text when Herod does what he wants, does what he says he would do, and delivers the head of John the Baptist to his daughter. But it haunts him. Perhaps one ought not play so fast and loose with the sacred things of God. The question is, has David learned his lesson in this second parade? Maybe. Maybe not. The writer of 2 Samuel shows us David's dance from the view of Michal, his wife. She's appalled that he dances nearly naked before the servant girls. Some say Michal is jealous for her dead father, Saul, this modest and humble man. Some say Michal is a nagging wife. But perhaps her perspective should not be dismissed so easily. Michal sees a side of David that the writer of the text wants us to see too. We see her disgust for his behavior, dancing all but nude in the city street. What if Michal like the death of Uzzah, played an important role in David's self-understanding. What if she offered a necessary correction to David, a warning to not let his power go to his head? This year is the 40th anniversary of the Jonestown Massacre. Maybe you watched the NBC program this weekend on that event, that ordeal. Many of you remember Jim Jones, the charismatic leader of the People's Temple. Most people don't realize he was a disciple of Christ, ordained disciple of Christ minister, Jim Jones. He studied at CTS in Indianapolis. I studied at CTS. No correlation, I swear. The movement he started in Indianapolis was powerful. It was among the first faith communities that managed to bring people together across the racial divide. It all started really beautiful and good. To hear those early adherents, it was heaven on earth. People shared their wealth. They lived in a community. They grew in an agricultural garden. They worked together. It was great. But something went terribly wrong. Because on November 18, 1978, a total of 918 people were dead in a compound in Guyana. All but 2 had been poisoned to death by drinking or being forced to drink grape Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. Mass murder made possible because a charismatic leader lost touch with his own limits and no one could hold him accountable. As the story is told, there were only a handful of survivors. I actually interviewed a woman when I was working at the Disciple magazine who was the only person on the compound after the suicide murder happened. She had hidden under her bed, and when she came out, the entire compound was littered with dead bodies. She was the single individual on the compound to survive. But there were other survivors you don't hear about much. That's because they never left Indianapolis. They survived because they didn't buy the hype. One of them was a cook at CTS. Simple woman. She declined to make the move to California when the People's Temple moved from Indianapolis to California and then on to Guyana. She wouldn't go. And it wasn't because she was so in love with Indiana, although it is a nice place and the crop is looking really good, really good. She declined to move to California because something in her saw the side of Jones that other people didn't see. One day, in illustrating his point, she said, Jones put the Bible on the ground and then he stood on it. He put himself above God, above God's word. Both feet. She wasn't college educated. She didn't even finish high school. She was a simple cook in the line at the CTS cafeteria. But when that powerful leader seemed to put himself above God, she knew he was playing with fire. She left the movement and she begged loved ones to do the same. Those who heeded her advice lived to tell about it. We live in a complicated world. We are a complicated people. On the bright side, those complications keep life interesting. But when power and lack of accountability combine, we can go off the rails. We can hurt others and hurt ourselves. That's why faith communities like ours talk about how we treat each other. We look at things like the ethical guidelines that we will discuss today. Yes, we're going to serve food to get you there. But the conversation is worth having. It's just a document. but it's designed to help us pay attention, to hold us accountable to the core values we have as a faith community. To remember, even without an ark to dance in front of, that wherever we dance, we're always in the holy presence of God.